Welcome to PetroNoia, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the energy debate. Hosted by Dan Romito, this show takes complex energy issues, strips away the agendas, and delivers clear fact-based insights. Whether you're an industry expert or simply looking for a balanced perspective, PetroNoia brings clarity to the conversation. Each episode, Dan breaks down key topics, from U.S. energy independence to global policy impacts, focusing on the facts rather than the rhetoric, helping listeners make sense of the energy landscape. This is PetroNoia, where we separate fact from fiction to fuel-informed discussions.
Welcome to PetroNoia. I'm your host, Dan Romito. We have a special guest today, the first repeat guest.
I'm honored.
Right? We were talking about you put it on your LinkedIn profile. Tim Tarpley. I don't think we need the introduction because your reputation precedes you, my friend. Big beautiful bill passed. I didn't realize that the actual name of the bill was the big beautiful bill. I thought that was like the nickname.
No, that's actually what's written on top of the bill. That is the name. That is the official name.
So just diving straight in, there was obviously a variety of versions, and when you're seeing this, it's really hard to keep up with it. In terms of the final version, what was different in the final version as opposed to what was originally proposed?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when you say originally proposed, we'll kind of start with the House package, right? So the House was not bound by the Senate rule, the 60 vote rule.
Okay.
The Senate has a procedure that you must reach 60 votes to pass legislation, except for legislation that is tied to the budget.
Okay.
So the only way you're going to pass a big, beautiful bill like this is you're going to have to do it through what's called the reconciliation process, which means it's going to tie to the budget process. That is 50 votes, right? The Republicans have a 54, margin in the Senate. So at the beginning of this Congress, everyone kind of knew, hey, if we're going to do a big package, it's got to be done through that reconciliation process. That only matters for the Senate.
Okay.
The House is simple majority.
Okay.
It's a tight margin in the House, so they still have to make sure that they can.
The margin just is 3, or is it 4?
It depends who's there that day, but I believe it's 4 now.
Okay.
But you have Fitzpatrick, who's in essentially a Democrat district,
right?
He did not vote for it, and you've got Massey, who's got
doesn't vote for anything.
Ideological problems with almost everything. So you're working usually with like a two vote margin.
Okay.
And then you might have people out, that throw that off as well. So the House had a much different ballgame to play with.
Okay.
So the House bill had a lot more in it. Had essentially a lot of a permitting reform package, which is very important to us. But when that got over to the Senate,
okay,
the Senate parliamentarian has to sit down and say, okay, go through each provision and say, is this really tied to the budget, or is this just a policy provision that they're trying to ride in here?
So there's a check and balance.
It's a check and balance.
See, and it sneaks through like that.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and I won't divulge too much here, but it's kind of an interesting story.
Okay.
That process is called the Byrd bath.
Okay.
Because former Senator Byrd was appropriations chair.
Okay.
And for a long time, and they used to just dump the whole kitchen sink into the reconciliation bills. And it was an old trick because it was you could get around the 60 vote margin.
Okay.
And Senator Byrd, and I think rightfully so, said this is getting ridiculous.
Yeah, monster.
Yeah, right.
It's like the Frankenstein approach.
Right. He said we have to. This is we're going around the rules that we passed for ourselves. Right. So he created what's called the Byrd bath, which is the Senate parliamentarian goes through and says, this provision, yes.
He had to sneak a couple beers into the party once you start bringing kegs into the front.
It just gets kind of silly.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So that's what happened. So, the Senate parliamentarian had to kick out a lot of provisions. Now, he or she, in this instance, she is not supposed to. It's not supposed to be political.
Okay.
It's simply supposed to be: is this provision a budget tied? A provision that ties to the budget, and if it's not, it's out. So a lot of what I would say good things got kicked out in that process.
Yeah. I'm imagining like a meme in the back of my head, like this poor little lady like going through my line with Trump like just leaning over, like breathing down her neck.
Well, it's probably probably the toughest job in Washington, and people wanted to get her fired. There was people that wanted to just have the Senate override her ruling.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that didn't happen. The Senate is very a very traditional body. Okay. They're gonna follow their rules. They don't like outside influence.
Yeah.
And here's the thing: both parties, at the end of the day, benefit from the 60 vote rule. When you're up, you don't like it because you there's things you can't get through. But when you're down, you sure as hell like it because it helps slow down the majority. And the intention is really good. It's designed for a situation when you have one party that controls three branches. You don't want them to just ram through every possible thing that they want to do. You want to have some ability to slow it down a little bit, and it gives the minority some power there to do that. And it helps.
Feels like they're getting so beat up, just a couple cracks here and there. It's
Right.
complete whipping.
Right.
Okay. So they go through that process, and then the primary things that didn't make it were what?
Well, for the things that I'm watching that matter to energy, it was really a lot of the permitting reform provisions, some NEPA provisions. There was a provision to expedite LNG permitting, just a whole host of permitting reform. And that's really the next step from our perspective of what we're going to have to really advocate for Congress to do is that permitting reform package that got left on the
And
floor.
we were talking about that. So
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like Dan the conspiracy theorist. Was that to some extent intentional? Because what I don't think people are realizing, and we were talking about this before we went on air, that there's not necessarily like this permanent win. This is a temporary victory.
Sure.
We've won a battle, but in terms of the war, we still have these midterms in 26 that are around the corner. And if midterms, I hope I'm getting this right, don't keep the current House and Senate at least the same, right? Then it can easily reverse itself. Is that the way ChatGPT is telling me? Is ChatGPT correct?
It's a great question. Two answers to that. Well, the first is, so there's only so much that can happen in this next midterm.
Okay.
Right now, the generic congressional ballot, Real Clear Politics, they average all the polls. So you try to get it gets the outliers out of there. I think Democrats have about a 3.5% advantage going into the congressional election.
What is that like? Is that 3.5% means what?
It's a
higher probability of retaking?
Correct. It's a generic congressional ballot, so it's just people saying right now, across the country, whatever congressional district you're in, who would you vote for? The Democrats have a 3.5% margin lead. That is actually not as high as it typically would be in a midterm. Typically, the minority party who the president, whatever party the president is, the other party typically is going to go into the midterms very strong. People get frustrated with leadership. That something goes wrong, they tend to just vote the other way. That's traditionally the way it goes in America. Traditionally, you typically see a 5 to 6 point margin at this point. So certainly the wind is favoring the Democrats, but it's by no means a guarantee.
Okay.
You're also seeing an effort that the president is pushing both Texas and Florida to do redistricting. Yeah. And Governor Abbott just announced that he's going to try to put it on the special session.
Okay.
So Texas, may move forward with that. The goal there would be to squeeze out a few more Republican districts from the redistricting process.
How hard is redistricting? Is that? I mean,
it's incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it sounds not easy.
And there's also a lot of risk, right? Because Texas as a state is about a 57-58% Republican state.
Yeah,
it's already about 64% of the districts are Republican. So if you try to squeeze out more, you're going to make all those margins a lot closer in all the rest of the districts. So the intention is to give you a couple more seats in the midterms, but you could long term cause a lot of seats to get a lot more.
And the Florida thing is interesting. Like I mean, to me, like Oklahoma really is only like the more redder state than Florida. Like, I don't know how much, to your point, you can squeeze out of there.
It's true. There's only so much you can squeeze out.
Okay. So you have, if the Epstein files is the catalyst that comes back to like screw everybody over because people are salty about that.
I had one more point on that. So the House is going to be very close. It's going to probably go down to like three or four seats either way.
Okay.
Right. The Senate probably gets off a 4-seat margin. That I think it's much harder to flip the Senate. Not saying it couldn't happen if it was a strong showing for the Democrats that night, but probably the House is going to be more in place. Senate may hold. So in a scenario where the Senate stays Republican, House flips, everything just stops. I mean,
it's lame duck.
It's just lame duck. So that we would see a lot of these changes in BB remain for Trump's presidency.
But that would also mean that permitting reform probably doesn't happen.
permitting reform, regardless of what happens in the midterms, is going to have to be bipartisan.
Okay.
And it goes back to what we talked about at the top of the discussion. It's that 60 vote margin.
Okay.
So you're going to have to build a coalition. It's very similar to the coalition that supported the Senator Manchin permitting reform bill at the end of the Biden administration.
Okay.
It's going to have to be oil and gas, renewables, the utilities, all going to have to sit down and do kumbaya.
Okay.
And they're going to have to get behind a bill that is going to be bipartisan, because that's the only way it's going to happen. There's no way to ram it through as part of a budget, budget process.
Leverage I was kind of referring to, like maybe
Yeah.
it's like secret genius, like we're just going to cut everything out of this and then magically give some of it back, right? The tax credits back. And will that be enough, do you think?
Well, certainly, the folks over there, with the renewables that are gaming this out, they have to be thinking that that's going to be their leverage as part of this negotiation, is to extend some of those, ITC and PTC credit deadlines, some of the ones that end in a year, to try to push those back. So, I mean, I imagine they're going to bring up that in those discussions. Those discussions haven't even really started yet. Everyone's trying to catch their breath after the BBB, but permitting reform is really next on the docket. And as soon as Congress gets back, really after the summer and into the fall, that's what's on the docket. It's certainly what we're going to be pushing for.
Yeah. So hold on, permanent reform, because obviously I want to expand on that. But
Yeah.
worst case scenario, we have the midterms and the House and Senate flips, and the big beautiful bill, for all intents and purposes, gets reversed back to the IRA.
Well,
Is that the worst case scenario?
assuming the Senate and House flip, you still have the president's ability to veto.
Okay.
But then you play the game. So a veto override, you got to have 2/3.
Yep.
However, that game doesn't necessarily have to be played. If you have a Democrat Senate and House, they can simply attach provisions on must pass legislation. The president's going to need something, so that's when you get to the negotiation. The president says, "I need debt limit increase," or "I need some sort of emergency funding," and then the Congress says, "Well, okay, we'll give you that, but we need the following things." So it doesn't happen all at once. It's slowly they bring back provisions. The other party would bring back provisions.
Yeah, I mean, the frustrating part, once again, I think the big beautiful bill net is a massive win. The frustrating aspect for me is when we're having conversations, mostly with generalist investors like in New York or out west, Chicago, whatever it may be, the uncertainty that they have on the policy, right? Policy is risk for them. So it's like rock or a hard place, in the sense that all these, let's call it pro-energy, pro-fossil fuel, pro-industry measures were passed. But in terms of their permanence, people are still like, yeah, I just want more certain guidance and certainty on what 2027, 2028 holds.
Right. And the pendulum of politics has gotten where this pendulum swings very far to that. It's very hard on business. I will say one of the best things in my view in the BBB is it gets rid of a lot of the uncertainty on leasing, both offshore and onshore.
Okay.
The old language left a lot of discretion to the administration. And for example, President Biden's administration, they used that discretion to essentially shut down onshore and offshore drilling. And then they had it in that. I would argue they didn't have it as much as they took, but by the time you take it to the courts, the damage was already done. With the new language, even future administrations that may be less favorable to oil and gas are going to have a harder time playing games with that language.
Okay.
So that is something that's like permanent. Yeah. Now, sure, you can always change the legislation, but as long as that language remains in statute, it's going to bring some certainty to our friends that are investing both offshore and onshore drilling. So that's good because it brings permanency. But you will need the second part, permitting reform, as we were talking about.
Right. And permitting reform, one of the things that it fell through the cracks with me, but I'm glad, obviously that's why we have you. Hydrogen sort of got like a lifeline.
It did
on the cut, right? It didn't get the 2026 acts. It got a 2028 acts. Do you think that's in part because obviously to scale hydrogen, you need massive infrastructure, which requires permitting reform. But do you think there was like a sneaky little strategy? Not sneaky, is that the right word? Crafty strategy. I got to watch my words. Crafty strategy to kind of keep hydrogen on a lifeline to facilitate permit reform?
Sure. Well, that's an interesting question about the permitting reform aspect. Hydrogen was in a tough spot coming out of the House. As you mentioned, it had that earlier deadline, and it kind of last minute as part of the negotiations on the Senate floor. It came back and it got a little bit of a lifeline there. There are certainly members on both sides of the aisle, folks like Senator Curtis, who were big supporters of hydrogen, who may have played a role. I mean, I don't know that, individually how the horse trading went, but there were definitely Republicans down there fighting for hydrogen. There's been a lot of investment in hydrogen infrastructure in quite frankly, Republican states.
Yeah.
And by, big, large, oil and gas companies as well. So I think all of that played a role. As far as this technology versus this technology, that is kind of the game in Washington. There are supporters of certain technologies, in the Senate, and they're gonna trade and horse trade. And really, at the end of the day, the big winners, in my view, were oil and gas especially.
Right.
And we can talk more about that. Nuclear remained essentially the same. The big losers were solar and wind. Although, the ending language was kept them alive a little bit because I've got a year to get these projects up, but it is going to be very difficult to develop a new project. The projects already have to be pretty far along to meet that 1 year deadline.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I was just doing a talk earlier in the week in Nashville for GoPack, and it was a variety of state level representatives who are relatively newer. And the gist of it, most of these people are either on healthcare or energy related committees. And so, we have this presentation in UC, and it's like the tech bros are calling the energy shots, which is crafty, but we showcase just how much power AI is going to require. And for the most part, one of the most common pieces of feedback that I receive is like, I had no idea it's going to be this much power. So to your point, like I'd rather see the incentive structure aligned with just how do you get, and you were putting this perfectly when we were talking, how do you just get more megawatts on the grid? Forget about the widget per se,
Right.
but like focus on the end goal. Do you see nuclear taking that spot? Because inevitably that's going to be really the only mechanism that will facilitate that degree of power.
We're really bullish on nuclear. A lot of our companies are investing in small modular reactors. They see this kind of like wave coming. I personally think we need everything.
Yeah.
We need every megawatt we can get. I don't.
On deck.
Yeah, all hands on deck. I don't care how they're producing it. I do think that this new structure set up by the BBB is going to very much favor gas power generation, which is dispatchable. It's affordable. We've got it's domestic. We have all of this, so it really fits kind of all the needs that the policymakers want. At the same time, though, you can only build gas-fired power generation so fast, and there's in the supply chain.
We had engine number one on yesterday, and they're telling us the wait time for a turbine is 3-4 years if you're lucky.
It's 3 or 4 years. So those are all going to get that. They're going to be built as fast as they possibly can. I think we're still going to need additional power for the grid. So it's nuclear, it's SMR. I even think you'll see wind and solar. There'll be a rush to get projects out to meet the credit, and then the price of power probably will go up, and then at some point wind and solar will make sense without the credits.
Right. They're interesting. So obviously there's going to be a rebuttal, and clearly there's a bias in there. But like even Reuters, their headline I'm looking at right here, the BBB shrinks America energy future, makes it more expensive in terms of energy costs on the consumer. Like, can you just debunk that real quick? Yeah, I when I look at the big beautiful bill, I mean, it could say like, just on paper you're taking away solar per se,
right?
But you're not shrinking American.
No,
future. I think you're expanding megawatt capacity.
I think that's a description used by someone advocating for the extension of those credits, and they're yeah. But no, I mean, look, the question is just where you can pay for it. When you have these tax credits, right? It's not free. We're paying for it out of the. So if prices go up, it's just where do you want to pay it? Do you want to pay it at the in your electric bill, or you want? I mean, there's no
front end or back
front end. There's no free money here. I personally think the strongest argument with against those credits has always been when you have a natural gas fired power generation facility, especially, or a peaker, that can always run, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as long as you got gas flowing to it,
Right.
it can run. There is a cost to have energy production on the grid that cannot always run.
Right.
Solar and wind.
Mm-hmm.
Not, they're great when the sun's on, when the sun's up and there's no clouds, and wind's great when the wind's blowing. However, there's going to be a period of time when you don't have access to that
Right.
power on the grid, so you have to have something else. That's why natural gas and nuclear, even to some extent, fills that void.
Mm-hmm.
So the argument against the credits has always been that if we're going to incentivize something, we have to remember that there's a cost for this particular kind of energy.
Yeah.
And that has to factor into our determination here. And that was never really done with the credits. Certainly I think you could argue that it'd be better if you want to incentivize putting megawatts on the grid, you just incentivize putting megawatts on the grid regardless of what technology is doing that, or you just pull all the credits back and you just let the market figure it out, which I think in that instance at this time, gas is going to win that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too, because, when we're having these debates, and I'm not going down the climate change route, but people will say, we have to prepare for climate change. We have to prepare for climate change. Okay. Preparation, whether it's building infrastructure, innovating, whatever it may be, you still need really reliable sources of energy. So if there's some sort of climate change abatement that needs happening, wind and solar does not facilitate that, right?
Sure.
And doesn't play into that mix, which gets me into my question. Like we talk about mostly the E&P, but on the midstream and LNG side, once again, my friends at ChatGPT, 100-day limit on FERC certificate review. Can you expand upon that? Like what in practice, what does that mean?
Regarding LNG?
Correct.
So this is actually an issue that's been around for a while. It goes back to the Obama administration. Is FERC?
It goes back to Obama?
It does.
Okay.
So, and it's funny. I know a lot about it because I worked for Congressman Poe for a while, and one day he had a meeting with an LNG group, and he heard about how long these permits were taking, and he came back in the office and he said, "We're going to do a bill to fix this." So I did a lot of research on it. So if you're having an LNG facility, right? You're building, you have to get 2 permits. And the problematic permit has always been the second permit, which is if you are going to export LNG to a non-free trade agreement country, which is most of the places that are buying LNG,
right?
You're required to get a secondary permit. It's called a public interest permit from FERC.
Okay.
And they would sit on these. Because there was no mandate for time or how they had to respond.
Okay.
So during the Obama administration,
like Days of Thunder with Japanese lettuce,
right?
Just let it sit on the.
Because just let it sit there, and some of these were sitting for 2 and 3 years.
Like,
so there's been a constant effort to try to speed up that process and say, look, you can't just sit on it.
right.
If all the information has been turned in regarding the permit, you have to respond.
Yeah.
Yes or no, and if no, you got to give a reason.
Okay.
You can't just sit on it for all time. So that's what that provision is getting at, and I think it's well meaning. It's a great idea.
Yeah, 180 days is even. I mean, to wait even a half a year.
Right.
I could imagine waiting like 3 or 4 years.
And you have to remember that the LNG market is a world market, and there are plenty of other folks out there that can produce LNG and export it to anywhere around the world. So the more uncertainty we put into our system,
right.
when these companies are out negotiating to sell these contracts, the Japanese and South Koreans, they have to.
When are you gonna be ready? Like 4 years? Like, well, we're gonna go somewhere else,
right? They have
maybe sense.
The only thing that they're from their perspective is they want reliable deliveries of LNG to make sure they have the energy for their people need. So it's always been handicapping our ability to go out and negotiate.
Wait, do other countries LNG producers have a similar wait period, or like why was that just instituted because there was a thought that we should just not do LNG? Right. What was the...
So that's a great question. Do our competitors? It just depends on who we're talking about. I mean, certainly, the Middle East is a much quicker permitting process.
Okay.
Than that. Where that came from? I mean, there used to be, and this goes back to like Carter times when we had the energy crisis. There was a political concern about exporting both crude and gas because we always wanted to ensure that we had adequate supplies. spoiler alert, we have plenty of gas and oil, especially now, that we can export plenty. So this is like likened back to a different time when there were concerns that have completely been eroded now that just simply don't exist.
And then on the I'm going through my head on some of the other things that came up in these conversations. So now we have permitting reform on the table. If permitting reform passes at a federal level, what provisions or what options do states have to still hold up certain infrastructure projects, predominantly pipelines? Like how does that balance work?
Well, it's a great question. And bad news is if we get a tremendously excellent permitting reform package through at the federal level, you're still going to have issues with states because you still have, for example, New York. My wife works for a pipeline company, and I'm very, very familiar with this. You have issues in the Northeast. They simply won't permit pipelines through. So instead to get to Boston, you're going to have to bring that gas all the way around on a boat, which is insane.
But ironically, wouldn't that just penalize consumers because of the?
Of course it does. Of course it does. So, based on the federal and state system we have, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to pass federal legislation that forces New York to allow pipelines through. Okay. There's always going to be some mechanism that they can use at the state and local level to stop that. So, we're not going to solve everything.
Yeah,
but improving the NEPA process. NEPA is used to litigate against large energy infrastructure processes, to limit the ability of judicial review and basically lawfare, using lawsuits to strategically just essentially kill projects or slow them down to the point that they will no longer become financially reasonable. Those are two of the most important provisions you need to get through permitting reform. Those can be done at the federal level, and those will help. Are they going to solve every possible issue you're going to have to try to build across a country pipeline? No, but it's going to be a significant improvement.
So recently, I'm glad you brought up NEPA. There's been a lot of just stuff that I read in terms of like their efforts are actually counterproductive, right? They do much more environmental damage than people understand. For listeners, can you sort of describe who is NEPA in terms of like what they're intending to do or their aim? Like, can you just expand upon that?
Who is NEPA? NEPA is the I believe it's the National Energy and Environmental Protection Act. It's been around, I think, since the 80s, maybe even late 70s.
Okay.
Why it's important is it requires a series of steps that are done for large infrastructure projects, including energy infrastructure projects. This is where you're required to do the environmental impact statement.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's not. I mean, this goes back to a day when there would be projects that they wouldn't maybe study the impacts before. Not saying that's not a good thing.
Right.
But it is such a long timeline, and it brings in so many federal government agencies that are not acting at the same time. You have to get a permit from one agency. You have to get a permit for water from another. It adds an incredible amount of bureaucracy.
Right.
To the process.
Time, cost.
All of those approvals need to be done at the same time. Number one. And number two, you have to limit the ability for third-party groups to sue on every single aspect of that process, because that's what they'll do.
Okay.
You'll have these groups out there that are not actually attempting to protect the environment.
Right.
They are simply their intent is to stop the project.
Right.
So they have very good lawyers, and they will go out and they will sue on every single step of that NEPA process. And if there's anything that they think, and they'll also pick venues. They'll pick the best venues around the country or that follow the project line where they think they can get a favorable judge.
Right.
And they'll hold up the whole process. So number one, you got to have all these approvals occur at the same time to speed it up. And number two, you have to change the ability to sue.
Yeah.
Because otherwise this lawfare is going to continue and it's just going to kill all these projects.
And theoretically, would that be part of permitting reform, or is NEPA like an entire?
No, NEPA is a huge portion of permitting reform.
Okay.
They wanted to get it in the House bill, but into BBB, but ultimately it's a policy provision, so it wouldn't pass the bird bath.
Wouldn't pass the bird bath.
Yeah,
this is a whole separate.
It's a whole separate deal. It's going to have. This goes back to what we were talking about. It's going to have to be a bipartisan package, and there are plenty of Democrats that think you got to reform NEPA.
Yeah,
I think Senator Manchin. He's been a long proponent of this. So it is a bipartisan thing. I mean, I think And also back to our discussion about the different kinds of energy, everybody needs NEPA reform.
Right.
Oil and gas,
Yeah.
hydrogen, solar and wind, the utilities,
Mhm.
the grid folks that need grid capacity expanded. We're not going to be able to do any of that until we get that permitting reform. So everyone's kind of on the same page.
I think part of NEPA reform includes judicial.
Yes,
review. Okay.
it's very much related. Those are the two biggest provisions of permitting reform: is NEPA and judicial review.
I feel like this episode of a podcast should be like part of like the training for anyone thinking about running for office and understanding what sort of shenanigans they're getting into. So I mean, kind of back to states, like we let's make the assumption, just for argument's sake, that permitting reform passes at the federal level, but then you still have states that can hold up projects or just not approve projects.
Right.
Then are you just sort of stuck with the hand that you're dealt, or what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, you can litigate certainly, and there's attempts to litigate. States that block projects. You still have the courts to try to litigate that through, but it's very difficult, because there is support for states' rights in both parties.
Yeah.
So it'd be hard to pass a bill
Yeah.
that would give increased eminent domain powers to projects. The second thing is you're actually seeing kind of a surprising thing on the right. Is you're having a lot of landowners, your traditional Republicans, who are buying into this eminent domain thing and are blocking projects.
Yeah.
Both gas,
Mhm.
Hydrogen, carbon capture. And that's happening all over the country. That's something the industry really needs to work through, because it's a threat.
I think this is a ticking time bomb for the tech industry, because you have the tech bros looking for massive amounts of land to stick their data centers. They're obviously not going to stick it in a city. There's just not enough room. So they're going to rural areas. And with all the off the grid, behind the meter technology that a lot of the tech bros are implementing, the goal, the hope at least, is somehow, some way, someday they'll connect those facilities to the grid. Well, that requires transmission lines. And what a lot of these relatively newer politicians don't realize, particularly in the rural areas, is this is going to become a political hot button, because you're going to have landowners that, number one, don't want big, dirty, gaudy looking data centers like in the area. Number two, they're going to suck up all the juice, which is an adverse impact, a negative impact on their bills. And then number three, when the time comes to connect everything, if that time ever comes, but it will, they're going to put power lines on open land. And so people are really quickly realizing that they don't want this.
Right.
And you're seeing it pop up. And I don't think that's being talked about enough. Like it's the real difficult kind of quandary about.
It's the old NIMBY issue. It's not in my backyard.
Right.
I mean, nuclear has faced that for years.
Right.
We built Yucca Mountain out in Nevada to take the waste, and then you had I don't want to say every, but the vast majority of local jurisdictions then immediately passed legislation to prevent any truck with nuclear waste passing through their county or city.
Okay.
So you can't get the waste out to Yucca Mountain. So it's been a huge waste of money. Yeah, it's something we have to work through as a country. I mean, we are a very strong state and local powers, and that's good. That's a great thing that matters to us. But you do have to remember that when you build a large scale energy infrastructure project, for example, it is going to require the use of land, and it is going to require eminent domain in some instances.
Yeah.
So you got to balance that out, and I think the industry has to be better. Be able to communicate with these local communities and really sell these projects to those folks, because if you don't do it right, they're not going to buy in.
That's the other thing too.
Yeah.
Like we've had conversations with environmental NGOs, no names, as much as I want to call some of them out. And they just don't want to budge. And it's
right.
Like, something has to give in terms of like what that actually is. Like, I don't know, man, it's going to be really dicey, and it's not like we have a lot of time to work with. I feel like this is getting really depressing really, really quick. I don't mean to do that.
No, I mean, I think we will figure it out. I mean, to try to go to the positive side.
Yeah.
One thing, the greatest thing about America is when we have a challenge and we really, the rubber hits the road, we tend to figure it out.
Right.
And I think this is a significant challenge.
Yeah.
Because you hit it right on the nail. There is our competitors, the folks who we're competing with on AI and these new technologies, they don't have these challenges.
Right.
In China, you want to build a facility, it happens. It will happen. So we have to meet this challenge because otherwise we're going to be left behind. And that's one thing we never do.
Right.
We will figure it out.
Yeah.
I'm confident in that. But
I just don't like we're fighting China with one arm tied behind our back, maybe
Right.
with a ankle weights on or something like that, so we can do
Right.
cool karate kicks or something.
right.
And to me, it's like, why are we shooting ourselves in the foot?
Yeah.
I don't get it. With that too, I mean, the other component on controversy is like coal. Like coal was a big winner in the bill, right?
It was. And I think, again, back to my point, we need all the megawatts that we can possibly get. I think you're going to see coal-fired power generation that currently exists. You're going to see it extended a much farther. Its lifetime is going to have to be extended.
So in other words, we're going to stop prematurely retiring coal-fired power plants.
Right. As far as new coal-fired, I think that's a little bit harder sell, especially when you have gas as such a good alternative. But yeah, these timelines, these retirements on coal-fired power generation, I think you're going to have to get extended, and you're also going to have to extend the lifetime of a lot of our existing nuclear infrastructure. And there's a lot of companies out there that are investing in that and extending a lot of those plants.
I mean, SMR has to happen, right? I mean,
Right.
we have China and Russia. I mean, do you think China and Russia I think they're sort of leading, or a little bit ahead of us on the SMR stuff because they're already having it implemented.
I think we need to invest in nuclear. We cannot be left behind.
Yeah. What are some of the rebuttals that you hear on the Hill when it comes to stuff like that? Like why to me, nuclear makes so much sense, right? It's hard for me to objectively look at rebuttals and be like, oh yeah, that's a good point. Like if you want clean, quasi-renewable, nuclear. You want, minimal land footprint, nuclear.
Right.
And we had a nuclear scientist on. He's like, dude, the water you drink, the tap water you drink has more radiation in it than what you'd be exposed to if you walked into a nuclear facility.
Right.
Well, we'll stop drinking tap water, like that's for sure. But I mean, he laid it out and it was just a head scratcher. Once again, nuclear scientist bias, but like what would be an objective rebuttal as to not do it?
So first of all, to your point, I'm seeing a bipartisan kind of revival of nuclear support.
Okay.
And I think the reason the nuclear credit was left completely alone, I don't even think there was like a debate. Everyone was just like, we'll leave it.
Like, cool. Okay.
Yeah. The only criticism of nuclear that I hear, from the policy side is just when you look at the smorgasbord of things that you can invest in, you have some people, especially on the Republican side, that say we should just be investing in gas. There's such a long build out, there's such a high cost.
Right.
Let's just gas makes more sense.
Okay.
And on the Democrat side, they may say, well, it's not completely, clean. You have all this waste that we haven't dealt with. We should just be investing in wind, solar, or hydrogen, or whatever the other technology is. So they're you kind of get down the sides. But I think recently everyone's kind of come together and said, you know what? Let's take another look at nuclear.
Right.
Maybe our prior opposition was maybe a little hasty.
Yeah.
Let's take another look at this, and I think it is enjoying a bipartisan support right now.
Okay. There are some articles, and I'm going to pull these up. Once again, I'm so biased, and I fully admit that. But I always feel like I'm crazy, right? I'm like, so I want to figure out where I'm going wrong. One of the things that really wasn't mentioned, geothermal, right? What is geothermal? Is that just pushed to the sideline for the time being, or
no? I have my credit cheat sheet. I believe geothermal essentially remains unchanged.
okay?
I think again, there's a bipartisan agreement, not necessarily that this is going to be the panacea, but that maybe we should keep investing in this. We shouldn't just. There's enough there that let's keep going.
Okay,
Yeah,
fair enough. I love this quote, and we can put this into the chat, the source of it.
Yeah.
It goes, air pollution, particularly from power plants and vehicles, is expected to dramatically worsen all across the United States. Annual emissions are expected to increase in Nevada alone by 200,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. This is where I have like a little bit of a conniption fit with the air pollution thing. So first off, if you look at the stats, air pollution 100 years ago was horrible.
right.
Today, it's there, but it's trending in the right direction. If you look at where emissions come from the most, it's from power plants. And who's using the most power? The technology sector, right? And they sort of get this pass. And I don't know why that is, but I think that in the not too distant future, the word will start getting out and you'll start having more of these sort of like combined entities. And we're getting to see it like right now with Amazon doing the nuclear thing and Microsoft doing the nuclear thing. Do you think that the tech community will become more instrumental in permitting reform? Because those are the ones that have the most to lose.
Yeah. 2 points, two things I want to point out. First of all, to your original quote, I think they're using funny math because if anything that this new policy setup is going to do, it's going to increase gas-fired power generation.
Right.
And if you go back to 2005 in the United States, between 2005 and now, we've lowered our overall emissions by more than any other country. And a bipartisan, the EIA, bipartisan group, they say that the primary reason for that is transitioning coal-fired power generation that's going offline to gas-fired power generation. So the more gas-fired power generation, I think overall emissions go down. I think that is just looking at like a specific area of Nevada, and it's trying to extrapolate that out.
Try looking at Vegas where all the planes are flying.
Right. So I would call into question that stat. To your point about tech and energy, so I personally think that right now, you say I work in energy or I work in tech. I think those lines are gonna get blurred.
Right.
They already really have. Tech can't survive without energy, and I think energy is going to be, the tech is going to be such a growing customer of energy that we're going to get tied together. Yeah. I think that's a good thing ultimately for both sectors. But if you are building large scale data centers around the country, there's no way you can not be considering energy as your primary factor.
Yeah.
So yes, I think the sectors are going to grow a lot closer, and they're going to have to.
Yeah, I just you begin seeing it with what Amazon and Microsoft are doing, but I think it goes into like just larger economic opportunities, like the carbon markets, like voluntary carbon markets. I don't want to see any sort of carbon tax or carbon border adjustment mechanism like they have in the United States. Do you think carbon tax or variation of that comes into play when we talk about permitting reform, potentially as like a negotiation tool? Or where's the future negotiation as far as it relates to potential carbon tax lie?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I personally think carbon tax is politically dead for now.
Thank God.
Yeah, not to say it couldn't come back in a future political environment, but of the things that keep me up at night, that is not on the list, right?
What are the top 3 things?
Oh, the top 3 things.
Yeah, what are the top 2 things?
No, I mean, I think I think for our companies, I think the biggest aside from obviously the market conditions, price of oil, is really the tariff uncertainty.
Okay.
That if that is probably the most concerning to our companies, because it's just hard to read and figure out how this is going to go. And to plan out long term with that uncertainty, I think is.
But to be fair, and I don't want to sound like an apologist, and we were talking about this. Right?
Yeah,
like you grow up and the textbook will tell you tariff bad, right? Just the textbook version or the textbook definition of tariff. This seems like a little bit different. Now, once again, it still implements a variety of uncertainty into the market, but this tariff policy seems more like you're not acting in accordance with what our best interests.
Sure.
This is a penalty.
Sure.
Right. Do you think that interpretation is sort of building steam in the general market, or people just hear tariff and they're like, nope, I just sit on my hands?
Well, yeah, I think you certainly the president is using them as a method to negotiate long-term trade agreements. It's the hammer. It's hey, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. Let's have a negotiation. And if I don't think you're doing
right,
negotiating good football,
Doyle, you're Billy Madison.
That's a good cop, bad cop negotiation strategy. And quite honestly, maybe that's going to work with some countries, and it has worked with a few countries, and I give the president credit for that.
Right.
The thing I worry about is that it takes a long time
Yeah.
to do that strategy, and it's a 4-year administration. And do you number one, run out of time,
Yeah.
and then two, do you just put a lot of long-term planning on hold for those years while you're doing that negotiation process? I think that's my biggest concern.
Okay.
I get the intent, and the intent is good, and certainly bringing manufacturing back to the United States is vital, and it is a national security issue, 100%.
Yeah.
So the intent is good. I just worry that it takes so long, and when you have companies that are operating on a 1 and 2 year planning cycle, that that's a big challenge for them. That's my concern.
And it brings up a point. It's hard to establish we're not going to subsidize anything, right? I was listening to an economist talk, and I wish I was an economist, because then when you're well, the model doesn't work. Yeah, well, but sort of bring it full circle back to nuclear. One of the biggest things that we hear, which is a completely valid and actually well thought through risk assessment, is who is willing to leverage their balance sheet, right, to get involved into nuclear. That is a risky proposition, particularly when you take into account your payback period. If you're lucky, is 25 years. Realistically, It's 40 years. Right? You have these two elements of duration, right? 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it may be, and then leveraging your balance sheet to the nth degree, which anyone in the industry obviously knows that you were beaten over the head for a decade on capital discipline, but you just don't over leverage yourself.
Right.
Do you think there's a likelihood that the government could get involved as an investor, or at the very least an insurer, to get nuclear going? Because otherwise, without investment, we could talk about all that we want. Like, this needs a ton of money.
Right. Well, there is a lot the government can do. First of all, one of the biggest problems with nuclear is the regulatory uncertainty. Right. How long is it going to take to permit this thing? What about the liability? Is there going to be some sort of reinsurance? Right. You got all these questions. The government can fix those pretty quick. And to this administration's credit, they have moved forward a lot of those permitting issues on nuclear. They've directed the agencies to expedite.
Yeah. Every time I hear Chris Wright talking, he's bringing it up. He's talking.
He gets nuclear, and he gets the benefits of it, and he gets that it's got to be a part of our future. So it's great to have him in there working that. So this administration has really done a lot to help speed that up. But to your point, that's only going to go so far. Right. You got to have the investment has to make sense. Yeah. And I personally think it will.
Okay.
Because as we look at these power demand projections, you kind of sit there and say, okay, where else is this load going to get filled? Right. And nuclear has to be a part of that. So I think ultimately it's a business decision, and I think ultimately the business decision is gonna make sense.
Yeah, I love your point on sort of incentivizing the goal as opposed to the means, right? It's right. There's many ways to skin the cat, as the cliche goes, but like at the end of the day, I think we need like 400 terawatts. I think that's the number.
Yes.
Well,
that number changes, by the day, but significant, and it needs to be all throughout the country. And if we don't meet that power demand, the industry is gonna go where the power is, and that it could be to other countries. And I think we have to recognize that as a country, or we're going to get left behind.
No, I agree with everything you're saying. On the bill itself, what other components or what elements of the bill sticks out to you in terms of like, okay, yeah, that's really, really good, or on the other side, you're like, oh my God, like this is a head scratcher at best.
A couple things we haven't talked about yet that I think are worth mentioning. I think we talked briefly on the permitting for both onshore and offshore. That regular cadence for that quarterly cadence for lease sales, it's excellent. We're going to see a revival of investment in the offshore. That's going to be great. Okay. We need that. We need that energy. We haven't talked about this. There was the methane fee was hanging over the head. Yeah. A lot of especially independent producers didn't quite know if they were going to be able to meet some of those requirements. There's been a 10-year pause on that. Okay. Certainly there was a push for a full repeal. Right. That wasn't possible. But
why was it impossible?
Well, a lot of reasons. One, it had to do with that Senate budgeting process. Two, there may have been, maybe they didn't have the votes. It's hard to say. But 10-year delay, at least that gives us some regulatory certainty. maybe we could have had a full repeal, which has been a little bit better, but I think that's a big win.
Yeah.
As well. Bonus depreciation.
Okay.
On the tax side, that's a big deal for a lot of our companies as well.
And expand bonus depreciation.
100% bonus depreciation.
Okay.
It returns to the 100% bonus depreciation. So that's helpful for investment. So there's some other good things in there as well. And then I think just generally speaking, it gives kind of oil and gas kind of like a pep talk.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, I was looking for the right word, but it's a little bit like, yeah, y'all are favored politically. We support you.
Right.
Go out and invest.
Yeah.
And I think it sends market signals, which I think is positive. That may be actually the biggest takeaway from this bill. Is it sends market signals that oil and gas is a good investment. Go out and do and make that investment.
Yeah, I mean, connecting the dots, a really simple equation. It's like America first, American dominance.
Right.
In order to do that, you need to facilitate energy, the most reliable and affordable. Once again, cliche now, I get it, but still it holds true, like natural gas and then all these other things that are adjacent to it.
Yeah.
Can I bring it back to the methane tax?
Sure.
Real quick. There's still confusion, I feel, on emissions management overall. Like, to what extent do we disclose? To what extent are we going to be on the hook from a regulatory perspective?
Right.
To what extent, like what's irritating to me too on the investor front is granted I was in New York and we'd asked a couple investors, okay, to what extent are you guys really evaluating this stuff? And like, oh, it's important to us.
Yeah.
Okay. Hypothetically speaking, if you had a company returning high double digits, or at least let's say 2x the market, but their emissions profile was not great, what would you do? And they just sit there, right? They don't definitively say one thing or the other, but you probably imply that they wouldn't necessarily do anything. What I think people are underestimating is emissions management is more important to rebut the inevitable, let's call it, objections to the oil and gas industry should midterms not go their way.
Right.
You're essentially playing an option that if things don't go as desired, that all this stuff could potentially come back on the table, and then you have to start all over on this.
Right.
Whereas I think preparation or just normal strategy would say, even if you do this stuff and put it on the shelf, have it readily available. Is that the same way that you look at it? Or it's almost like your government relations office. It's like government relations is a relatively easier job because everyone's good. Like you were saying this the first time, like,
yeah,
you need it when things are bad.
Right. It's a great question. And I think I would just say my advice to someone that's considering this exact question that you just laid out. First of all, always try to avoid the huge pendulum political swing. If you're a business, try to stay in the middle, right? Think things are going.
Play that fairway. Baby.
Yeah, play the fairway right down the middle. Right now, certainly the pendulum is swinging towards reliability.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say just throw out emissions and take your sustainability report and throw it in the trash. That's the wrong move.
Right.
You still got to pay attention to it. Political winds could shift very easily, number one, but number two, you got to remember if we're selling product into Europe,
right,
the rest of the world, the politics are different there, and they may require certain emission standards in order to access those markets. Many of the companies we represent are international, so they still have to pay attention to this. But even if you're domestic, at some point you want to access those markets at some point in the chain. So I think you still care about emissions. You still want to move forward on new technologies that lower emissions. I think that's good for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It just may not be kind of like the only thing like it was for a few years.
Right.
I think we're getting back to a little bit more reasonable policy,
right,
where we need this amount of energy, we need a reliable grid, we need this amount of oil and gas, and let's figure out how to produce that with the most reasonable emissions profile that we can do, which is what we should have always been. Yeah.
And then my final question, the Tim Tarpley crystal ball. How are you feeling about 26 midterms? How do you think it plays out?
Personally, I think it's real close. I mean, I think we actually talked about this last time if you look historically, the party not in power is always going to do well in the midterms.
Yeah.
Certainly, I will say the president has changed a lot of traditional political calculations, and he's kind of throwing them up in the head.
Yeah.
So right now, he's underwater on his favorability rating, but not by a lot.
Right.
He's still fairly popular among Republicans. His popularity among independents has gone down, which is something they need to really watch at the White House, because that's what hurts you in the midterms.
Okay.
So you really got to watch those independents and see where they are. It was in the 40s last time I saw it, and he won with like 70-80% of independent support. So you got to watch that. A lot of it will happen. Will be two questions. One, how does the big beautiful bill sell?
Yeah.
Out in the country.
Mm-hmm.
How do some of these provisions regarding Medicaid and some of those other provisions not related to energy,
Right.
how do those sell? I think that'll be a big question. Second question, how does the economy do?
Yeah.
If
Exactly.
the economy slows down
Right.
going into the midterms, it can be very difficult for the Republicans. If economy's doing okay, kind of, or stable,
Mm-hmm.
very good for the Republicans. So we'll have to see how that works. And then there's always the curveball. What happens with foreign policy? Is there,
Right.
what happens with Russia and Ukraine?
Mm-hmm.
Does the Middle East get hot again?
Yeah.
Those are curveballs that you really can't predict.
Do you think this Mamdani, however he says his name, Mamdani in New York, is a proxy for how people would be potentially attracted to sort of like that Uber left, or do you think it would actually end up being a referendum and having more support go more towards the middle, as what we saw with the presidential election?
Right. It's a great question. And I'm certainly not a Democrat political strategist, but if I was, they got a tough decision ahead of them.
Yeah.
They have to decide, are we gonna try to energize our base with who, in my view, would be more extreme candidates, like the gentleman from New York, or do they go to kind of the more blue dog, moderate, Bashir, type wing of their
Kentucky?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Did they go to that wing?
Yeah.
Or Shapiro in Pennsylvania? They go to that kind of the more moderate wing. I personally think they'd have more success going to that moderate wing.
Right.
But I'm also not a Democrat primary voter.
Right.
They tend to get energized. Those primary voters tend to get energized by the more extreme candidates, and then who can't win general elections. So, that's the conundrum that they face.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me that, first of all, that New York is even in that position,
right,
to begin with. Like that, I was in New York I was literally in New York. I was in Times Square.
Mm-hmm.
When New Yorkers just telling me, like, how did we get here? I'm like, well, where do I start? You know what I'm saying?
Well,
but likewise, the proverbial cracks or vulnerabilities lie with those independents.
It does.
And I don't think people necessarily understand to the extent there are more registered independents than Republicans, right?
They swing the elections, and it's a problem that both parties have. I mean, both Republicans and Democrat is the folks that are registered that actually, it's not just that you're registered, it's that you actually show up and vote in a primary.
Yeah.
They tend to be, on kind of the farthest wings of the party, but they are the individuals that pick the candidates that show up for the general election.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you're kind of stuck with these candidates that are more on the extremes, and you got to try to, fight it out. That's just the nature of our political system, and it's who shows up to vote in primary election.
No, that's fully. Yeah, I fully agree with you. I think everything does come back to what is the economic state,
right,
that month, right, or even that week, literally. Like,
right.
I think we're at a record high on the Dow. I think we hit that record high.
We did.
And so even if there's a correction, if my math, it would still be above 40,000, right? Because we're 44.5, whatever, maybe correction, assuming 10%. But people just, it's such a state of now, which is so frustrating.
It really comes down to the economy. I mean, that's what's going to be the big driver in the midterms. If people don't feel confident about the way the economy is going, they're going to vote against what they're seeing.
Yeah.
It's just natural human nature. If they feel pretty comfortable, think things are going the right direction, they're going to vote to maintain the political direction that they're going. There could be curveballs, foreign policy, all these other issues that could pop up. But at the end of the day, it's really about the economy, right? In both midterms and quite frankly, in presidentials, usually they bring in, personality a little bit as well, but it's still a lot of it.
That's one way to put it, personality.
Yeah, personality comes up. But really, the economic issues are always going to be a driver in politics. It's always been that way.
Well, my friend, I can't thank you enough for coming back in.
Thanks for having me again.
No, this was awesome. If people need to get a hold of you, do they just look you up on your LinkedIn, or what's the
Look, we have on the LinkedIn, T Tarpley at energyworkforce.org is the email.
Perfect.
Feel free to drop me an email anytime. And you know, we support the energy industry. That's what we're here for. So we want to support, you know, the folks that are listening to this podcast. So that's what we do.
Thank you so much for coming in, buddy.
Sure.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.